This afternoon, I am visiting with Charles Perry. He is a candidate for the Texas senatorial race to replace Senator Robert Duncan. May I call you Charles?
Sure.
All right, Charles, you are a CPA by profession. What prompted you to decide to run for a state office?
Well, 2010, I had clients every day, without exception, would come in and say, what are we going to do with our country? We feel like our country's being lost. We think that, morally we're bankrupting the country. We think that fiscally we're not doing good things. And I'm kind of a put up or shut up kind of guy. We started a little group in Lubbock that ended up meeting every week. Over 100 people were coming. I had never saw myself in a political position, never saw myself in a political office, but the story's interesting enough. I went to Israel with my church group that fall, which is about October of that year, and I just mentioned, kind of in passing, I think I'm being led to kind of get in this House District 83 race. And through a lot of prayer, and I announced probably about a week before filing deadline and never had anything but a sense of peace that it was supposed to be me. So I will literally say God has got a strange sense of humor. He encouraged me to do this, and he still encourages me every day to do this. So it's a call position at some level. It's obviously full of personal sacrifices, and on a family level, a lot of family sacrifice. When you work for a living, you have to make some choices in there and try to maintain both sides of this appeal. But it's one that I feel called and led to do, and I feel like I'm here for this season. There's a season, and this is, I think, was the season that I was in, and I was led to do it.
So what has brought you to the place where you decided to change from being a representative over to the senatorial side?
I truly believe that 2 sessions in the House makes me leaps and bounds above my competitors, and having the ability to work through the state budget, appropriations, being served on appropriations last session, 1 of 27, writing the state budget is invaluable to this region, this rural West Texas area, the values and things. But having the number of background that I had as a private CPA, being able to go into the budget of the state, that's invaluable information that I can bring to the table day one. Build relationships on both sides of the aisle, Democrat, Republican, as well as credibility on Senate chamber, House chamber. Bringing those relationships over and being able to impact immediately into that. I think I'm the best qualified candidate for this session, for this season, for this time that our state's in. I keep going back to it. It's going to be a different looking Senate than what it has in the past. It's arguably going to be one of the more conservative Senates ever had at the state of Texas level. And I think I offer credibility coming into that process from my House experience, and I think I'll be good for the area for that reason.
Is there something in particular that you want to accomplish that's your focus right now?
Well, I think we always defend rural values, rural education, rural water, rural transportation. Those are just inherent within the process. It's urban-rural a lot of times, especially regarding funding, and I've got to be acknowledged that that's my battle of the day. Personally, I've always focused on the safety net, the entitlement system that's in the state that's a product of the federal government that we've inherited. And as you look at the state budget, it's growing exponentially faster than anything we have. And if we don't do something to bend the attitude, the principles involved in a safety net or a workstation versus a welfare state, we're going to end up with a budget that is consumed by entitlement and safety net programs in my lifetime possibly. So I've focused on how can we make that program more effective, more efficient, move people out of it as it was designed to do, make them have economic independence and freedom that we all seek. And you have to do a lot of federal interaction with that, so it's a challenge. Every time you go down this road, you've got to have that perspective that you don't control it all, but surely you can make it better and work with the feds to get those changes made. So I've focused on that. I'm real proud of our HB5 education initiative last session. Love to see that come to fruition. I think it's transformational in our education system. And then water. Water is constantly going to be the battle of the day. I'm proud of where we're moving to. It's not an issue of state ownership. It's an issue of being able to help smaller municipalities in my district be able to have leverage of state dollars by their credit ratings to be able to fund some of the water initiatives. We literally lose more water through leaky pipes in these older municipal systems than we use. And if this gives them a perspective where they can go in and finance their opportunities to redo those or revamp the infrastructures, we need to do that. So I'm proud of where we're going in that direction.
House Bill 5, you want to elaborate on what that is?
House Bill 5 is going to look back. I think it's going to be transformational in lots of aspects. One, it's the first time in the state of Texas in a long time that we recognized that students need options, that not all students are bent for college. four-year higher institution, but they may be a career tech guy. They may be a liberal arts person. But finally, I think what we're trying to do is make education relevant to the student. And if it's relevant to the student, then your teachers are more engaged because it's more fun to teach to kids that want to learn. So I think we're going to look back at HB5 is going to give us those options that we needed to make education relevant again, but specifically employers were scrambling for trades, scrambling for support staff in the medical industry. So it's not just auto body, it's not just diesel mechanic, it's not just oil field. There's a lot of different things that can dovetail off of this. And I think we're going to look back and we're going to have lower dropout rates, we're going to have better students, and employers are going to be happier because of those bold decisions that we set out in HB5 that said, we're going to give kids options and let them kind of be in control of their destiny. And I think that's smart.
What do you see as being really maybe, let's say, the top 3 issues facing Texas today?
I think the top 3 issues in Texas today are infrastructure needs. That would be transportation and water security, perpetual water supply, and the ability to fund our infrastructure. I think secondly, we've got to acknowledge that we're a growing state. It's a good thing in Texas we're growing, the bad thing in Texas we're growing. The challenge of meeting 1,000 people a day need and have going on for 10 years now is going to at some point hit a friction point. The cost of maintaining services for that kind of influx versus the revenues and the ability to find ways to be efficient in that are going to become almost at a stone wall. So I think growth is a challenge in Texas that we face. We're a victim of our own circumstance. We've got such a great economy, such a blessing of natural resources, and the ability to develop that into a robust economy is drawing people into it for all the right reasons. But it's going to be a challenge at the state level. And then I think thirdly, and I spoke to it earlier, was the Medicaid entitlement, the safety net programs. We've got to implement, and I'm working through that, systems where someone in that system has the opportunity to better themselves without punishment of losing everything on the safety net system. It's got to be an evolution out of it, and the cost savings from that we can use to help incentivize them to get them out. Secondly to that issue, we bend the generational curve. Mom is then economically independent because she's working and being recognized for those labors and is in control of that. The kids or the generations beneath her watch that. They get to see a change in attitude. So we've got to begin that process where these programs go back to what they were entitled to, and that's a help out, not a keep in. And I think that we're close to doing that if we can just get some things done. But that's been my task over the interim, is working through what that looks like.
Interesting. You just returned, I think, from the border, like even yesterday maybe. What did you see? What's going on? What's the current status?
Yeah, here's the way I put this. Texas is doing everything it can within its jurisdiction. It is a jurisdictional dilemma. We recognize the problem we have, but jurisdictionally we have very limited ability to do anything but capture and turn over, capture and turn over. There's so many levels of issues that are tied into this, and number one in my book is cartel. If we leave the cartel in effect, we're going to continue to see this energy pushing people out of that community or out of that state to our state, because who wouldn't want to get away from that? And that's where these folks are. So my approach, number one, the money that's being spent in Texas, which is $12 million a month for border National Guards and another $1.3 million for DPS and Texas. I saw it in action. We haven't actually seen the border groups show up yet, but they will in about 60 days. But it's serving as a deterrent, because the idea, if you can make it hard to do business in Texas from the cartel perspective, they may move. Now that's not my solution, that's not my preference. But if we don't take bold action as a federal government from a national security interest perspective and remove the cartel, we will never solve this problem. If we were able and should do that, as if we will go to Iraq for $1 trillion and save the oppressed people over there, there's never been more level of an oppression south of the border. It demands that kind of attention. If we did that, then American commerce would begin back over there, and those folks would have a viable economic life again, and they want that. That was robbed from them, and it was been robbed from their generations to come because of what the cartel has done. Let's get rid of the element that caused that problem, get rid of the corruption over there, make it a military action if necessary. Those folks go back over then, reestablish their lives and their business, and then we get the commerce going again, and people will go back and stay. their goal would not to be separated from their family and what they grew up with and their culture, but it's been robbed from them. So that's the ultimate bottom line. Only thing that will fix that is if we have a federal government that recognizes the security issue that it is, and it needs to be dealt with, if nothing else, on the humanitarian crisis that we're dealing with. You know, we'll go out of our way to help people in foreign lands, but this is our border. And so today, though, the option that Texas has, they're doing everything they can to deter and make that a miserable experience for the cartel to do activities. It's not the answer, it's not the solution, but it's all we can do as a state. The other option is do nothing, and then you really have a problem. When you have a welfare state and open borders, you have a system that collapses within itself, and that's where we're at today. You can't have open borders in a welfare state, so we need to fix some of the magnets, we need to work on the entitlement stuff, but at the same time, the ultimate solution is getting rid of that cartel, and we need federal action to recognize that.
We hear on the national news so much of the influx, especially in the southern border of Texas. What are you hearing as far as Del Rio and coming up our direction, more
Right.
West Texas?
You've got a 1,200-mile border in the state of Texas. You've got 13 zones, and they broke those zones out. Now, the problem, or why is Texas the state? You got Arizona and Mexico and California. Texas geographically is the lowest point of entry into those countries, so it just makes sense that that would be the state that they would pick to come into. All areas of the state of Texas are being impacted by this, and I'll tell you directly, the gang activity associated with the cartel activity are known in every big city. San Angelo, Lubbock, San Antonio, you name it, they've got an element of drug cartel activity. It's sprang up out of that, or they are a component of it, or an operative for it. So every community is being touched on that level. 700 identified jihadists out of the thousands of people that have been crossing that we've caught through this deterring process. Radical Islamist groups that are associated with these, so there's been an identification of those people that are here to do bad things. A border agent was killed 2 days ago off duty fishing with his dad. That was from 2 people. One of them has been a confirmed deportee on a 3-time basis. We deported this individual 3 times. So these are not good people. They're not people that we want coming in without acknowledging that they're here and where they're coming from. The kids, separate issue, tough problem, but the most compassionate and humane thing we can do, and what makes the most sense, is take care of the cartel element that pushed them out of it, let them go back home, reestablish commerce, and let them have that life over there. That's the compassion that I think we should seek as a country, because it's what makes us a good country. It's economic opportunities, and we should be willing to share that and go fight and defend that for someone that can.
We've got lots of school-age children that have come in. Are we going to be looking at having to educate them? School's, 2-3 weeks out at this point.
Having a discussion with a federal guy the other day, a federal representative, I just asked, just to be level straight up, are these kids going to hit my public school system within the next 2 to 4 weeks? And he said yes. He said maybe not all in Texas, but yes. As a budget rider, that's $12,000 per kid. You take 50,000 kids into our system, that's a $600 million price tag that state and local people are going to have to incur. We don't have that. So yeah, it's a real concern. I think we're naive to expect it not to happen based on the administration's policies of accommodation coming from the feds. They don't care about those issues. They don't care about what's causing the problem, and they don't want to deal with the direct causation of why that's happening. They're removed from it, but we're going to be left as taxpayers to pick up that tab. And then again, these are kids that, some of them are going to be great kids, some of them are very affluent. They're coming from Argentina and South and Guatemala. Some of these kids are very English speaking, come well-to-do families. Their families just acknowledge their country weren't safe anymore, so sending them out. So it's not all bad, but there is an element of kids that have seen the worst of the worst of the worst of humanity, of the evil that happens when humanity has no conscience. And you're going to have those kids mixing into our kids that it would not be anything for them to say, well, I just saw my sister gang raped. I mean, those are the things that these kids have been exposed to. So we have some really even deeper concerns and issues that are going on in this transfer of kids into our system that we need to be very careful of and cognizant of. And I could describe in great detail what the cartel's going on and doing down there, but it's so graphic and so repulsive. it's unconscionable and it's unspeakable. But the briefing I had yesterday was just really heart-wrenching. So you don't want to have to mix up kids that have been exposed to that at this level without some form of counseling and some form of helping if they're going to be integrated some way, form, or fashion by de facto. It's a cocktail for problems. It's a mix that's dangerous.
Huge issue there that we're going to be facing immediately. We've got so many people that love and want to come to Texas, not only the illegals across the border, but so many people have moved here from California and other states, and you were touching on it. We've had just tremendous growth, but while it's wonderful, it's got to have some negative and adverse effects. What do you see from the state level that we've got to address and prepare for?
We've got to figure out, number one, how to do our infrastructure. There's some things specifically to roads and bridges that we've got to deal with, and we need to deal with it honestly. And right now, the current system of funding for TxDOT is not as transparent as it should be. The current process in which those contracts are let and those roads are built is not quite as transparent as I believe it should be. Also, I need a plan that says if we put the money that's being asked into the system, that rural West Texas is not going to be shorted. How's that going to affect us? I want that formula determined before the money's given, because usually after the money's given, the cow's got out, you can't fix that formula. I also want to know that if we do this funding, is it going to really alleviate the congestion that's in the urban areas that's driving this decision? And to date, I haven't been provided any detailed plan that, 16 lanes on I-35 in Dallas is probably not possible, but that's what they said the need is. So how do you deal with this? And I'm not asking for absolutes. I'm saying give me some direction before we turn loose of a bunch of money, because historically, turning loose of money without a plan to this government agency, you wake up and wonder where the money went. So I don't mind spending the money on those things that matter, those core services, but I also want to know that we're going to spend it effectively and efficiently, and that's my task next session, is to bring that plan out to make sure rural West Texas is done, and if the money's given, that it actually goes to what it was intended to do. That's Transportation 101 in my book.
Well, we've had such an impact from the oil field and the oil boom. We're struggling with a lot of our highways and everything out here. What funds are directly dedicated for replenishing and keeping our roads in good repair?
Well, you got Fund 6, and we've got debt service on bonds previously issued to build the roads, and then we have enough money coming in for maintenance. That's where the rub is our debt is maxed on our pay-as-you-go system's not there. But the actual maintenance dollars, because of the growth and the maintenance needs and because of some of the issues with our robust economy and more people on the roads, have not been able to keep up with the funding. So specifically last session, first time in the state of Texas that I'm aware of and what I was told, we actually gave monies to counties that had a direct correlation of road needs because of the oil and gas traffic. So we did try to bridge the gap between increased appraisals, assessments, and collections, because in theory, you're going to have increased tax base because of the oil and gas production, which will then be assessed, which then will be collected. So it's a couple of years out. So we did some bridging. I think we'll still have a need for do some bridging. It's unfortunate that money was designated for counties that had oil and gas activity. And guess what? All 254 counties in the state of Texas showed a need that were tied to oil and gas. So it was diluted a little bit more than what I would like. That's the politics of the day. But had it stayed intact, I think it would have seen significant impacts on some of the very worst areas, Barnett Shale area, Eagleford Shale. Some of those roads had completely disintegrated. And I wish it hadn't got, but at least it was a start, and it was a precedent for, we're willing to step out in the state, but understand that oil and gas revenue is a part of these roads and bridges, and we need to reinvest that.
Well, out here in West Texas, our big deal has been water, or the lack thereof. Amazingly, here in San Angelo, now twice in the last 2 years, when we've been right at the verge of going into, I think it's level 3, total water rationing situation, God has abundantly supplied a couple of years worth of water. So he's never early, but he always seems to be right on time. Exactly, always right within that week of making that transition. But I'd be interested in hearing from the state level what things may potentially that y'all are talking about or discussing to help provide or create situations where we could have more water out here where we tend to it seemed to be a desert at times.
We are on the edge of a desert, especially where I'm from, and we grow crops that were probably not the best suited for that, but we've done it for years, and the good Lord's timing has always been perfect. I do see crop rotation. We have people moving out of cotton into grapes now, and it's a huge cash crop, and it's less water, and at the end of the day, once it's established. So I do see some of that. The good thing about agriculture, it's very economic driven. When it becomes cost prohibitive to go one way, they change the direction, and technologies or seeds or varieties have helped that. But specifically to water, I'm encouraged by water. A lot of people think, well, how can you be encouraged around water? The truth of the matter is, with minimum exception, in Senate District 28, there are some cities that meet this, but most people have undeveloped water resources. They literally sit on different water pools of water, different Dockham or Santa Rosa or Ogallala, but there's other resources that are sitting there that have not been developed. And I'll give you an example. Big Springs, Texas put in a water plant. We've had a meeting in Snyder, it's my district, and they were talking about the capacity to be able to desalinate brackish water of about 450 a thousand. Well, that's getting into a realm of possibilities for most municipalities. The footprint to do that plant was somewhere between $2 and $3 million for a 1.5 million gallon a day plant. So the economics of being able to develop brackish water, seabed water, which there's an abundance of in the Permian Basin south of here, down in that area. I'm told that 4% salinity can get around $8 a thousand maybe now. So now we're getting into the norm of, hey, that's reality now. We might be able to do that. So from the perspective of can we fix our water needs, I think the answer is absolutely yes. There are those areas where there is no undeveloped water resources, and they're going to be faced with bringing water in. And hopefully there's municipalities and systems around them that we can develop that will help fix that need. It's costly. Bottom line is, whether it's $4.50 a thousand or $8 a thousand, when people see water bills go up, they're not happy about it. But really, are we really being smart? Either you're going to have water or you're not going to have a city or life. So those discussions need to be had at city leadership levels, and just lead that either we're here as a community or we have no water and we won't be here. And those are the decision points I think facing it. Prop 6 gave the ability of being able to leverage small municipalities' dollars with the state borrowing rate. And so Dallas can borrow money as cheap as the state of Texas. Small municipalities can't. So they may provide them that window of opportunity on property tax values and things to where just that ability to borrow at 1.5 points less than what they could on a commercial market will allow them to redo their infrastructure or allow them to develop. So I like the direction we're going. You got to keep a watchful eye over it. You got to make sure the money's spent for judiciary. We're not going to just give money out to people that can't afford to pay it back, because this is an evergreen fund. There's a $53 billion water plant out here, and if this thing is lined up the way it's lined up, the revolving nature of the Prop 6 money, along with the $2 billion that was already available, over the few years here, we may be able to implement our water plan if it's done well and managed well. And the history of that state water board is we've never really had a default of any significance. So there is good credit processes. The other issue I think with water that's going to become main front and center is rights, property rights. Who owns the water? Well, state's very clear with that. The property owner that bought the land, the water sits on it, is the owner of that property and that water. And so I think that the state's been very clear and the Supreme Court's been very clear of who owns the water. The question becomes, what do you do statutorily taking? So if the area demands that the producer can't access the water or can't use as much water as what he needed to have an economically viable crop, that's a taking no different than if they take your house out for a state highway. There's got to be a compensation for that taking, and that's the next debate on the horizon. I think the Supreme Court will see numerous cases coming through on that, and it's only fair. I paid $1,500 for an acre that's got water. If I'd have bought one without water, it'd have been $500 an acre. So if you're going to limit me to my use of that asset that I paid that much money for, I've got to have some form of compensation for that. That's the challenge I think we face in the water issue going forward.
You've mentioned property rights a couple of times. What challenges do you see on the horizon now with things that are going on?
Well, you got the water discussion. I think that's one key, but I think the state's made it clear where they're at. You got federal overreach. The Red River case is a great example where they decided that through somebody's interpretation that the feds owned so many miles and acres of the Red River, which the guys had owned and titled and deeded and paid property tax on. So the property rights, I think, more importantly, is extension outside the state. It's the federal overreach. They've got a Clean Water Act initiative where they're trying to define navigable waters to include ponds on people's farms. They've done that for years. Their goal has always been to control the water supply. They've got an initiative on this Red River deal of property rights acquisition. They've got the Department of Interior continually bringing up issues of species that are extinct, are going to be on the extinction list, and that's just a back-ended way to shut down economic activity in Texas, be it politically motivated or not. The effect of that, they've got a CSAPR regulation that will change coal plants to gas plants, and the expense of that's going to be borne by the consumer. So they're trying to get a hold of your energy supply, your water supply, your land, and there's no real incentive for ag production anymore across the country. So now the food supply is being imported in from around the world. So I don't know where our federal government's going. All I know is that property rights in Texas are sacred, and we got to defend it.
Absolutely. Our property taxes keep increasing. What do you see from the state level on that regard?
There's some discussion about reform. You know, you can't fix property tax without fixing everything associated with property tax, appraisal creeps, disclosures. There's just a lot of stakeholders in that makes it almost impossible to do. I would hope to see some initiative on it, but then you start looking at consumption tax, income tax, or other tax to replace the revenue if the cost isn't available. I think people need to know we have a $200 billion state budget. As legislatures, we really only dictate what 17% of that's spent on. The rest is either statutorily or by law or constitutionally or federally mandated on how it gets spent. So we don't have this big pot of money to play with, and property taxes at the local school board level is a large part of their funding, cities, counties. We don't actually get it, but it's used in a formula on our school funding. So it's very convoluted, very complicated. You look at consumption taxes, there's a point where it's regressive if you're making $10 an hour. Where does that break happen? If you don't put appraisal creep legislation inside of a property tax reform, then anything you do good on a property tax reform level is circumvented in the next 2 years with appraisal creep. We don't have a state income tax because my experience as a CPA is if you're paying federal income tax, you pay state income tax. If you're not paying federal income tax, you don't pay the state income tax as you do those returns. So then you just shifted one more burden to the working class that's making 50% of the income and supporting the other 50% pay more taxes. So if you look at it on balance and honesty and you look all the way across the board, the system's probably the more equitable, having diversity in it. But the property tax has to have some controls put around it. People end up never owning their home. But my fear is we'll just go a little bit on reform like they did in '06. Everybody got a third off their property tax rate. Within 2 years that was dissolved through a creep and we went on down the road. Also, if you cut that rate and you give true property tax reforms, the guy that's paying rent, if the landlord don't pass that savings down to his rent, he didn't get any benefit of it, so his disposable income didn't go up. So there are all those little issues. You don't want to get into price fixing. You don't want to get into micromanaging. But if you go down property reform, it involves a lot of real issues that if you do it just halfway, you end up with more chaos than good.
Interesting. Good perspective on that. Okay, should I mention Obamacare?
Yeah, I think everybody understands now, and we were very prophetic in our thoughts of what Obamacare was going to do to our healthcare system. I was an advocate against the Obamacare system. The Medicaid expansion part of that would have bankrupted the state of Texas. It literally had nothing but problems with it. I can go into great details, 2 or 3 things that people didn't hear about what was going on with Medicaid expansion that had they known, they would have understood very well. But Obamacare is not the healthcare answer. It was not healthcare cost containment. It was funding, health insurance funding. And if you look at your premiums today, they're going to be more than what they were pre-Obamacare. 2% of the people signed up for the Patient Affordable Care Act in Texas. So you look back at now, and either we're geniuses or we're just dumb luck, that we knew that wasn't going to be the answer. That said, our health care in this state, in this nation, is probably the more complicated and the most pressing need that we have with respect to a budget process. We have access that's limited and will be more limited. We have costs going out exponentially, and we have people literally going broke trying to fund it. So healthcare has to be a major priority. We can do some things as a state differently. I was one that grew up the Medicaid block grant bill. I think it's got some legs on it that maybe can get some approval at the Fed level. It'll be a Texas solution to do some of the things that we need to get done. and I will be aggressive in pushing that forward. Medicaid expansion had numerous issues, but there were two issues that nobody heard. The way the expansion was going to occur, because it kept being said, well, it's going to be 100% funded, what do you guys at the state care about? Well, the problem with that was it was going to fund currently enrolled Medicaid people. If you were eligible but never enrolled, when that act was taken on as a state, then it was going to pick up all of the people that had never enrolled but were eligible to enroll prior to the act, but it was going to pick them up at the current reimbursement of $58.42. So we were going to be on the hook for another 1.5 million people, because 50% of stated people that are in the state were eligible for Medicaid and never enrolled. So the estimates we were getting were several $1 billion more cost to state. So nobody ever heard that. And here's the other thing. That provision to provide states 100% of coverage and it phases down over years was a rule, not a law. And the distinction there is in Health and Human Services, when we make a law in state, we give it to the agency, they promulgate rules. So this was not in the law, this was in a rule from Health and Human Services. Assuming we have a new administration going forward, which we probably will on a more conservative, fiscally responsible, I hope, one of the fears is they would come in and change the rule to say we don't have to fund that going forward. And then you really have a mess in Texas. So the uncertainties on those two issues alone just doesn't make fiscal sense for the state of Texas.
Where do you stand on the right to life?
I am activist, advocate. I stand for life. It's the sanctity of life as God's greatest gift, beginning to end. You can look at my record, my voting record. I'm going to rank in the top 5 probably on pro-life issues with the Texas Right to Life group, which is the premier right to life agency in the state of Texas. No equivocal.
Good. Where do you stand on the Second Amendment?
It is everybody's right to carry and bear arms. And I think that that's a Second Amendment right is something we need to protect and we need to engage and we need to further. There are issues with it. I think I had a good discussion with your group that be careful what you ask for. There's a lot of people needing or are demanding open carry. It is their right. I think they have every right in the world to be open carry. But if a private property owner does not want to extend that privilege to you, then I will be on the property right owner's side on that issue. So just be careful if we go down that road that we don't open up Pandora's box and want to have to defend two competing principles. Because given the choice of the Second Amendment versus private property, I got to lean with the private property guys. That's the only thing that makes us unique as a society. When I was in Europe a few weeks back, the one distinction characteristic I can sum up, they say they're Republican they're Democratic, but there is no expectation of wealth accumulation or property acquisition in their new republic. Those people, that's a foreign concept. Private property in this country is what makes us different from the world. Wealth accumulation and a goal of having something, a legacy of something to leave is something unique to America, and it's under attack every day.
All right, you being a CPA and having worked on our state budget, you've mentioned it several times, but what would you say are just really some really key issues that we face with our state budget that we need to address?
Well, I think first and foremost, we got to have a transparency budget. We put some transparent reforms in where we're not using dedicated funds for the unintended purposes. That's a non-transparent budget. We've got diversions going from Fund 6 transportation into GR spending for education. And in my honest opinion, we don't know exactly what it costs to do government in Texas. The general fund ought to reflect those core values, those core services, and today we've got so many pockets and movements of money, it's hard to discern what is the true cost of government. So I think first and foremost, I hope we continue to make our budget more transparent by ending those diversions. And when we do that, we may find out we're short or we're long, but then we'll know and can start working up. So transparency in budgeting is critical. We can't keep using people's money that was picked out of their pockets for one reason and using it on something else and tell everybody we balanced the budget. Deferred maintenance, it's rampant. It's state, local, and federal. We kick the can down on the road of so many things that we should be putting into our budget to take care of. In appropriations deal last year, we had several $100 million of deferred maintenance items on state assets that we just continually punt the ball on. So I'm about, let's get honest. Let's say what it really needs are, what the costs are, let's make it effective, efficient, and then we'll see where we're at. So those are some things. In the state budget, it's the growth. It's our public school system's 160,000 kids, every biennium hitting our system. It's the roads, it's all of those things we've talked about, but I really would like to see a budget that's clean, that's what taxpayers would expect the money to be spent on, and then I think we can have honest discussions about what else it needs to be done to it. But until then, and we've started those processes last session, we need to continue.
So our state budget really doesn't run so much like a successful business, but has maybe a life of its own, or?
It does have a life of its own, and some of it starts with what did we do last year, and my question is, do we still need to do what we did last year? Is that need still there? Were we good at what we did that money? Was that money still put to a good use? So maybe it's time to reevaluate that program and eliminate it because we're doing it somewhere else. There's a lot of duplicative services in the state budget, and that's peeling away the layers of this safety net. A lot of money comes in for the benefit of the single FTK for the kids. And when you figure out that this money here for FTKs or for kids, and this money over here for the kids, and this money over here for the kids, and if you put all that together, you're really effective, but we dilute it and administratively cost it out. So those are some things I'm working on. Not necessarily cutting the money, but just making sure the money's going and having the impact that it sought. So it is unyieldy. It's kind of, it's a 900-page budget or better. You got 4 months to consume, absorb, and try to do legislation in it. So all the work for the budget's getting done right now in the interim, and it's good to be a part of that. I sat in appropriations just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and you have your input, and you try to have that budget pretty much in rough form drafted, ready to go by the time you get back.
Wow. I guess you would if it was, well, of course it's that large, especially Texas, for sure.
26 million people.
Wow. As a Christian, and myself as a Christian, we see Christianity and Christians being attacked, and society is changing in a lot of ways. Is there anything that you see and things that we need to address to hold on to our rights as a Christian in our state?
We get the government we deserve. This country was built on people governing themselves. And in my humble opinion, Christians have sat on the sideline way too long. They've not been engaged in those decisions of the day, and they've done it all well intended in the name of tolerance, in the name of, brotherly love. But the truth's pretty clear. There are certain things that are not within God's precepts, and I think history will bear you out on it. When a nation turns its back from God's precepts, then it's pretty much inevitable what's coming. And I just hope that we have one more revival of the heart left, and I think we do. I think people are getting it. Sometimes we perform our best when we're at the worst. And I don't know how much more morally bankrupt we can become as a nation. How does that play into politics? I hear this every day, and it distresses me that Christian friends will say, well, we're not supposed to get in politics. And the answer to that is read Romans. You've got several options. You can sit on the sideline. You can be a rebel riser and create chaos, which that's not what we're called to do, or you can influence from a biblical perspective. You need to be engaged and have that influence. And you always go to the floor, no matter what issue, be it life, be it marriage, be it any of those issues, those values that Christians hold dearly, and you do it out of grace and love and truth. And 99% of the time, you may not see the results of what you did that day, but you planted seeds for change in the future. But we have to have godly people in public policy advocating for the truth. And it's not popular in today's culture to say there are absolutes. It's just not. But the truth of the matter is there is a couple of absolute truths. John 3:16 and John 14:6. I'm the truth, the life, nobody comes to the Father but except through me. That is not something our culture's good, and I'm not radical. I'm just saying it is my role and my platform. I think that we're all given our sphere of influence, and I have to engage that debate on every public policy level that comes up where it's relevant. And I think it's all relevant. Government's from God. He created civil authority. So there is a time, I think, as Christians, we're going to have to decide. We can be anti-civil. We can be civil disobedient if we're willing to accept the consequences. Daniel, and Meshach, those guys, they got it, and they were willing to accept the consequences, but God honored that. So we're here now. So, Romans tells me every day that if God's with me, who can be against me? I'm not doing it in a facetious manner. I'm doing it in a perspective of, number one, I have the fear. I don't want to have to answer to him for what I didn't do. At the same time, I know it's what's best. I love this country and these folks too much not to try to keep them in a path that I know that's better for them than where we're heading now.
Well said, well said. We've talked about a lot of different things, and in closing, a couple of more questions I've got, but just kind of want to refocus for a moment on ultimately, what would you like to accomplish while you're in office as a senator? What's kind of your top goals?
From a public policy perspective, I'd love to see a safety net system that encourages and gets people out. I really think if my legacy was, you know what, Perry tackled the stuff nobody wanted to talk about, nobody was willing to go to the feds and battle over. If I could get a system that truly is a help out to where the Christian perspective is, we're here to show you a better way, and put it into that public policy, because arguably there's so many in there. I don't know if we can reach one person at a time and change those hearts, but if we're going to have a public policy that does this, I want to be doing it in the vein of, we want to get you out. We want to get you out of this. So if I could leave a legacy that I've moved that agenda where working mom can move up and not have to fear losing support for her kids for a while, and that brings a new hope and a new generation of people that don't look at the government as the sole being an answer to everything, I think that's a good legacy. That's my goal. That's my big goal. Along the way, I think we just preserve our values. If my legacy, and I can tell you right now, today, there's more kids on the street of Texas today because of my pro-life stance. That's a legacy I can live with today. I'm good with that. If I didn't get nothing else done, that was good. And I think we were frugal and judicially putting our funding in the right place. But there's still things to fix that we haven't fixed. But the legacy of life is already there for me. I know that there's babies today and kids tomorrow that'll be here because something I had a direct impact on. But if I can change that entitlement system and it become a model for the nation, maybe, I'd like to do that. That'd be fun. That'd be good. It wouldn't be for me.
I like that. I like that. Going to Austin for the first time, and I can't imagine actually going through that process of from small business owner, community-minded and everything, to suddenly being in the midst of state government. What was the biggest surprise that you really did not expect that you encountered? Or was there one?
Well, a couple of things. One, how diverse we are as a state. We are so different at so many levels for so many different areas. But I will tell you this, the nice surprise. We're all people. We all want what's best for our families. We want opportunity. And rural or urban apart, our value systems may be a little cockeyed because of political platforms or political affiliations, in my opinion. But really, I guess we're all just trying to make it work. And so it was nice to see that there's not these big bad guys on each side of the fence just drilling out. We get it right, but it's diversity. I mean, what works in Tahoka won't work in Austin. What works in Austin won't work in Houston. What works in El Paso doesn't look anything like Sterling City needs. So it's that diversity that provides the challenge, but that's what makes us rich. If we were all alike, it'd be a boring place. So I think that, I tell you that the first time I hit the button in the House on a vote, I felt a huge burden on my shoulders going, I just changed 26 million lives, and I hope it's for the better. So it really is it's an awesome experience. It's a humbling experience, and it burdens you if you think about the impact. You're changing people's lives. That kind of experience was what was kind of, I remember the first day, and I thought, man, that just did something. And I hope I'm right, kind of deal. It's just interesting. But we're all people, and we just want what's best for our folks, our family. That's really what I pulled away from.
Got to ask you a question from the media standpoint. How can the media be more effective in getting out the information to the electorate about what's really going on? We have so many op-eds and blogs and this, that, and another, but Where can we find that source of what's really
Well,
happening?
You gotta have an engaged people first that want to hear truth and want to spend the time to research candidates and want to hear these interviews. These are great formats to hear hearts of interviews. If my opponents were sitting in the same room with me, I would feel good about it because you would get this heart perspective. You would learn how we think, why we think, what we think. There's not enough of that in a 7-day, 24-hour-day news cycle where 5-second sound bites become the rule of the day instead of the truth of the day. You get gotcha politics, you got people with agendas, and you get into the situation where you never know what we think or how we think or why we think what we do. All you see is that sound bite. So the media is discrediting themselves. So I think spending time. You got to spend time with the candidates to understand what they're doing, and I think you got to be willing to spend the time to get that experience. So news media that are on these budgets, on these cycles, on these 30-minute cycles, they're always going to be under the gun for the next story, and that's a disappointment. And I don't know how you change that dynamics, but it reflects, in my opinion, a society that's very shallow. That's what they demand, because if they should demand a little bit better, I think they get a different response, because media is just like anything. They're in the business of making money, and if people aren't interested and engaged in what they're saying, they don't want to do it. So I would encourage those media outlets that have the time and the independence to be more informed, to take the time and get that message out in as many ways as you form. This is a good one. There's an hour-long news station in Lubbock, and a lot of people kind of slough it off in hour news. But you know, when they talk to the candidates, they give them 3 to 5 minutes, and they ask them good questions, and it's usually a pretty substantive interview process. And that's a good process. If you'll take the time, even in that 3 to 5 minutes, and listen to all those candidates, you walk away better than what you would have if you listened to a Fox News Channel soundbite that just caught somebody in a bad moment or a weak moment or out of context. So it's really sad. It's really sad. It takes time on both sides, and I'm not sure we got time on either side willing to be committed. And I don't know if we change that.
Time will tell, I guess,
Time
on
will
that,
tell.
for sure. Anything else that you'd like to share with the viewers?
I just tell you, I thank you for letting me do this. Number one, it's very gracious. I think it's important that you hear from Charles Perry and his perspective, and hopefully a little heart in that. I think it's important that you investigate who you're going to put in this position. It's a big position for this area. But at the end of the day, I'm just one guy trying to get it right. I start and stop in the scriptures each day. I also look at, is it measuring up with what my belief and value system is? Is it something that I can always be proud of? And so that process is where we're at. So that's all I got. Just pick up the phone and call me if you've got questions. You'll get good answers.
All right. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.